I watched their expressions shift in unison as the executor read the final clause of my grandfather's will. Disbelief, shock, horror. They had spent the previous hour smirking behind manicured hands, exchanging knowing glances while I sat quietly, in the corner, the family disappointment who would surely receive nothing more than a token memento. Now their faces had drained of color, eyes wide with stunned recognition of what they had lost and what I had gained. My cousin Thomas dropped his Mont Blanc pen. My Aunt Eleanor clutched her pearl necklace. My Uncle Frederick's hand trembled as he reached for his water glass. In that moment, as I observed their collective realization that the family fortune, all $87 million of it, had been left entirely to me, I felt no triumph, no vindication, no desire to gloat. I simply recalled my grandfather's words from our last private conversation. True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who remains beside you when you have nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they had treated me as if I were nothing. Now I possessed everything. I hadn't always been the family outcast. Growing up, I believed we were a normal, loving family. Flawed, perhaps, but fundamentally connected by bonds stronger than our individual shortcomings. My grandfather, Harrison Montgomery, had built his fortune through decades of shrewd investments after starting with a single hardware store in a small Midwestern town. The company, Montgomery Holdings, had expanded into real estate, technology, and sustainable energy, growing into a business empire that supported multiple branches of our family tree. Though financially comfortable, my childhood wasn't defined by extravagance. My father, James, was the youngest of grandfather's 3 children and the only one who seemed uncomfortable with wealth. He had chosen education over business, becoming a literature professor at a state university where he met my mother, Sarah, a talented botanist with a passion for rare orchids. They raised me in a modest colonial home filled with books, plants, and lively discussions rather than expensive trappings. Money is a tool, not an identity, my father would say, a philosophy that shaped my worldview profoundly. I grew up valuing knowledge, creativity, and authenticity, values that would eventually make me the subject of family ridicule. The divide began when I was 10, the summer my parents died in a small plane crash while traveling to a botanical research station in Costa Rica. Their death shattered my world and reconfigured our family dynamics in ways I couldn't comprehend at that age. Grandfather immediately took me in, moving me to Montgomery Estate, the sprawling family compound that had always seemed more like a museum than a home during our holiday visits. Suddenly, I was living under the same roof as Uncle Frederick, Aunt Eleanor, and their 3 children, Thomas, Victoria, and Elizabeth, who had occupied the East Wing for as long as I could remember. Uncle Frederick managed the family business operations, viewing himself as the natural heir to grandfather's empire, despite the fact that grandfather remained firmly in control well into his 80s. From the beginning, their welcome felt hollow. "Of course we'll embrace James's boy," I overheard Uncle Frederick tell grandfather. "He's family, after all." But the inflection on family carried an unmistakable qualification, as if my branch of the tree had grown in the wrong direction. The years that followed were exercises in subtle exclusion. While my cousins attended prestigious private schools, participated in exclusive social clubs, and were groomed for positions of influence, I was educated primarily by tutors. Grandfather selected himself, brilliant, unconventional teachers who nurtured my natural curiosity and independent thinking. I wasn't prevented from joining family activities, but neither was I actively included. Invitations came as afterthoughts, tolerances rather than welcomes. "Why doesn't Noah dress properly for dinner?" Aunt Eleanor would ask, eyeing my comfortable clothing with disapproval. "Has anyone taught the boy proper table manners?" Uncle Frederick would mutter when I used the wrong fork. My cousins absorbed these attitudes, gradually transforming from curious playmates into distant relations. Thomas, the eldest and Uncle Frederick's pride, became particularly skilled at disguising contempt as concern. "Grandfather's wasting resources on those science projects of yours," he told me when I was 15 and engrossed in building a hydroponic garden system in one of the estate's greenhouses. "You should be learning about the business. That's what matters in this family." Only grandfather seemed to appreciate my differences. He would visit my makeshift laboratory late in the evenings, asking thoughtful questions about my experiments and offering suggestions from his own entrepreneurial experience. "You remind me of your father," he said once, "but with your mother's practical insight. They would be proud of the person you're becoming." Those words sustained me through the increasingly chilly family dinners, holiday gatherings, and summer vacations where I felt like an anthropologist studying a tribe I could never truly join. I learned to navigate the undercurrents of family politics, to speak the language of polite disinterest that characterized Montgomery interactions, to exist in the margins while appearing present. By my 18th birthday, the divisions were firmly established. Thomas had graduated from Harvard Business School and taken a vice presidency at Montgomery Holdings. Victoria was engaged to the son of a senator with business ties to our family. Elizabeth was completing her degree in fashion design, with plans to launch a luxury brand using family connections. I had been accepted to MIT with plans to study environmental engineering, determined to develop sustainable technologies that could address climate challenges. "Such a charitable pursuit," Aunt Eleanor remarked when I announced my college plans at dinner. "Though I suppose someone in the family should handle our corporate social responsibility image." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The implication was clear. My interests were peripheral, useful primarily as window dressing for the family's more serious financial endeavors. I had learned not to argue, simply nodding and continuing to eat while conversation flowed around me. Grandfather, however, surprised everyone by announcing a substantial donation to MIT's environmental science program, along with the establishment of a research fellowship in my parents' names. The gesture meant everything to me and clearly irritated the others, who viewed grandfather's resources as pre-allocated family assets. "The old man's getting sentimental in his age," Uncle Frederick complained to Aunt Eleanor later that evening, unaware that I could hear them from the hallway. James was always his favorite, despite being the least business-minded. Now he's transferring that favoritism to Noah. "It's just guilt," Aunt Eleanor replied. "He feels responsible for James and Sarah's death since he provided the plane. Once Noah's settled at college, Frederick can help redirect Harrison's focus back to proper family priorities." Their words stung but didn't surprise me. I had long suspected that my presence was tolerated only because of grandfather's insistence, and that the others were counting the days until I would leave the estate and become a footnote in family history. College provided blessed distance from the daily tensions of Montgomery Estate. I immersed myself in studies and research, finding community among fellow students and professors who valued ideas over lineage. During those years, I limited my returns home to major holidays and grandfather's birthday, brief visits that became increasingly uncomfortable as the family's financial expectations crystallized. By my junior year, Uncle Frederick had positioned Thomas as grandfather's eventual successor, orchestrating situations where Thomas could demonstrate his business acumen and commitment to the Montgomery legacy. Victoria had married her senator's son and joined the board of directors for the family foundation, overseeing charitable giving that seemed designed primarily to enhance networking opportunities. Elizabeth's luxury brand had launched with significant family investment, despite showing limited commercial potential. Meanwhile, my research into algae-based biofuels had begun attracting attention in scientific circles. A paper I published with my faculty advisor was featured in a leading environmental journal, and a small technology incubator offered seed funding to develop our concept further. When I called grandfather to share the news, his genuine enthusiasm contrasted sharply with the tepid acknowledgement I received from the rest of the family. "That's nice," Aunt Eleanor said when I mentioned it at Christmas dinner. "Though, I'm not sure how practical all this green energy business really is. The family has substantial investments in traditional energy sectors." "Diversification is important," grandfather interjected firmly. Noah's work represents exactly the kind of forward thinking that built this family's wealth in the first place. The conversation shifted quickly to Thomas's recent acquisition of a regional supply chain company, but not before I caught the flash of annoyance in Uncle Frederick's eyes. That evening, I overheard another conversation, this one between Thomas and Uncle Frederick in the library. "Grandfather's getting more eccentric," Thomas said. "We need to consider whether it's time to suggest a reduced role in operational decisions. The board would support a gradual transition of authority." "Patience," Uncle Frederick counseled. "Harrison's health isn't what it was. Nature will take its course, and then we can restructure things appropriately. Just make sure you're positioned." As the clear successor, I retreated silently, troubled by their casual discussion of grandfather's mortality and the naked ambition it revealed. That night, I sought out grandfather in his study, finding him reviewing documents with his characteristic attention to detail despite the late hour. "You should be enjoying the party," he said, looking up with a smile that warmed his weathered features. "Christmas only comes once a year." "I prefer your company," I answered honestly, "and I wanted to thank you for defending my work at dinner." He set aside his papers with a sigh. "This family has forgotten what built our fortune. In the first place, innovation, risk-taking, seeing opportunities where others see only problems." He gestured for me to sit beside him on the leather sofa. "Your father understood that, though he applied it to knowledge rather than business. Your cousins understand spreadsheets but not vision." We talked for hours that night, about my research, about his early business struggles, about my parents and the values they had instilled in me during our too brief time together. As the grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, he fixed me with an intent gaze. "I want you to remember something, Noah. True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who remains beside you when you have nothing. This family has lost sight of that truth, and I fear they'll pay a heavy price for that blindness." At the time, I thought he was speaking philosophically. Only later would I understand the concrete implications behind his words. After graduation, I declined offers from prestigious engineering firms to focus on developing my biofuel technology. With my faculty advisor and 2 fellow students, I founded Verdant Solutions, a startup dedicated to commercializing algae-based biofuels for industrial applications. We operated on a shoestring budget, converting an abandoned warehouse into a combination laboratory and production facility, working 18-hour days to refine our processes and court potential investors. The family's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Playing with pond scum instead of taking a real job?" Thomas remarked during a rare dinner when I managed to visit the estate. "Very idealistic, but hardly practical." "There's a place for you at Montgomery Holdings whenever you decide to get serious," Uncle Frederick added. "Entry level, of course, but with your name, you could advance reasonably well." The condescension was hardly subtle. To them, my venture represented a quixotic folly, a naive refusal to accept my designated place in the family hierarchy. Only grandfather showed genuine interest, asking detailed questions about our technology and business model. After dinner, he invited me to his study again. "I'd like to invest in Verdant Solutions," he said without preamble. I blinked in surprise. "That's generous, grandfather, but I can't accept family money. I need to do this on my own." He chuckled, blue eyes twinkling. "Who said anything about family money? I'm talking about a personal investment separate from Montgomery Holdings. I've been following your research for years, Noah. Your technology has tremendous potential, both environmentally and commercially. Uncle Frederick and Thomas won't approve, I pointed out. They don't need to approve my personal investment decisions, he replied with a sharpness that reminded me he hadn't built his empire by avoiding conflict. I'm offering $2 million in exchange for a minority stake, standard terms, no special treatment. Your business partners would never know it came from your grandfather unless you tell them. His offer solved our immediate funding challenges while respecting my need for independence. We structured it as an investment from Harrison Montgomery, personally, not from the family business or foundation. The paperwork was handled by Mr. Chen, grandfather's personal attorney, who I would later learn was also the executor of his will. With grandfather's investment, Verdant Solutions accelerated our development timeline. We refined our production process, secured our first commercial contracts, and began attracting attention from larger potential partners. I threw myself into the work, finding purpose in creating something meaningful that honored my parents' values while addressing real environmental challenges. My visits to Montgomery Estate became increasingly infrequent. Grandfather understood my dedication to the company, while the rest of the family interpreted my absence as further evidence of my peripheral status. When I did return for major holidays or celebrations, I was treated as a distant relation rather than an immediate family member, seated at the far end of the table, included in general conversations but rarely addressed directly, tolerated rather than welcomed. I accepted this treatment with outward equanimity, having long since stopped expecting genuine connection from people who viewed relationships primarily as strategic assets. The emotional distance allowed me to observe family dynamics with clinical detachment, noting how Uncle Frederick's influence had grown as grandfather delegated more day-to-day business operations, how Thomas mimicked his father's mannerisms and management style, how Victoria and Elizabeth competed for status through increasingly lavish lifestyle displays. What I didn't fully appreciate until later was how carefully grandfather was observing the same dynamics, drawing his own conclusions about the family he had created. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. I was in our lab, troubleshooting a production issue, when my phone displayed the Montgomery Estate number. Expecting to hear grandfather's voice, I was instead greeted by the formal tones of Mr. Chen. Mr. Montgomery, I regret to inform you that your grandfather passed away this morning, he said. The preliminary finding is heart failure, peaceful, in his sleep. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Despite his age, grandfather had always projected such vitality, such essential presence, that I had never truly prepared myself for his loss. I gripped the lab counter for support, grateful that I was alone in that moment of raw vulnerability. A memorial service is being arranged for Saturday, Mr. Chen continued. Additionally, as executor of your grandfather's estate, I am required to inform all primary beneficiaries that the will reading will take place on Monday at 2 p.m. at my office. Your presence is requested. Of course, I managed. I'll be there for both. After ending the call, I sat immobile, memories flooding through me. Grandfather teaching me to fish on the estate's lake, his patient explanations of business. Concepts when I was too young to fully understand them, his quiet pride when I showed him the first successful prototype of our biofuel process. With my parents gone, he had been my only true family connection, the one person who saw me as I was rather than as a disappointing deviation from the Montgomery template. I canceled my meetings for the remainder of the week and made arrangements to return to the estate, simultaneously dreading the family interaction and feeling a deep need to honor the man who had shaped my life so profoundly. The memorial service was exactly what grandfather would have hated. Formal, ostentatious, filled with business associates and social connections rather than genuine friends. Uncle Frederick delivered a eulogy that focused primarily on grandfather's business accomplishments and the legacy he had built, a legacy that, he heavily implied, would now continue under proper management. Thomas stood at his father's shoulder throughout, the heir apparent receiving condolences with practiced gravity. I remained in the background, accepting brief acknowledgments from family members who seemed unsure how to categorize my grief, as if my peripheral status somehow made my loss less significant than theirs. Only Mr. Chen sought me out specifically, clasping my hand with surprising strength for his slight frame. "Your grandfather spoke of you often," he said quietly. With great pride. Those simple words provided more comfort than all the elaborate floral arrangements and catered reception combined. I nodded my thanks, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. The next 2 days passed in a haze of memory and anticipation. I stayed at a hotel rather than at the estate, needing space from the family's performative mourning and subtle jockeying for position. By Monday afternoon, when I arrived at the imposing downtown offices of Chen, Watanabe, and Lowell, I had achieved a state of numb resignation, expecting nothing more than perhaps a small bequest, grandfather's collection of first editions, perhaps, or a modest trust fund reflective of my status as the family's black sheep. The conference room already held a tableau of Montgomery confidence when I entered. Uncle Frederick and Aunt Eleanor sat at the right hand of the empty seat at the head of the table, with Thomas beside them projecting executive authority in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Victoria and her husband occupied the next positions, she in understated designer morning wear, he scrolling through messages on his phone with practiced nonchalance. Elizabeth sat next to them, looking bored and slightly hungover. Several other relatives, cousins, in-laws, the extended branches of the family tree, filled the remaining seats. Only one chair remained empty, at the far end of the table, isolated, and symbolically removed from the core family. My designated place, obviously. I took it without comment, nodding general acknowledgement to the room rather than engaging anyone specifically. Mr. Chen entered precisely at 2 p.m., accompanied by 2 colleagues carrying folders. He took the empty chair at the head of the table, set his briefcase on the polished mahogany surface, and surveyed the assembled family with impassive professionalism. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As executor of Harrison Montgomery's estate, it is my duty to communicate his final wishes as expressed in his last will and testament, revised and signed 6 months ago with all proper legal witnesses. This information caused a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. 6 months ago. The family had clearly expected an older version of the will, one created before grandfather had begun delegating business responsibilities to Uncle Frederick and Thomas. Before I begin the formal reading, Mr. Montgomery left a sealed letter to be read to the assembled family," Mr. Chen continued, removing an envelope from his briefcase. He broke the wax seal, unfolded the letter, and began to read in a measured voice. "To my family, if you are hearing this, I have completed my journey. I hope it was a good death, quick, painless, dignified. I've never been one for drawn-out goodbyes or maudlin sentiments, so I'll be direct. Throughout my life, I've been guided by certain principles: integrity, innovation, responsibility to others, and the fundamental understanding that wealth is a tool, not a virtue in itself. I built Montgomery Holdings from nothing because I saw opportunities to create value, not because I craved luxury or status. In my final years, I've had ample time to observe how these values have, or have not, transferred to the next generations. Some of you view the family fortune as an entitlement rather than a responsibility. Some measure success by possessions rather than contributions. Some have confused inheritance with achievement. My will reflects my assessment of who among you truly understands the principles that built our family's success. Some of you will be disappointed, others may be surprised. All of you will need to respect that these decisions represent my final judgment, made with full mental capacity and careful consideration. Whatever you receive or don't receive, remember that true wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who remains beside you when you have nothing. Mr. Chen folded the letter and returned it to the envelope before looking up at the suddenly tense faces around the table. I will now proceed with the formal reading of the will. What followed was an hour of increasing discomfort as various family members received significantly less than they had clearly expected. The family vacation properties were donated to conservation trusts. The art collection went to museums. Various charities received substantial endowments. Uncle Frederick and Thomas retained their positions at Montgomery Holdings but received only modest personal bequests. Victoria, Elizabeth, and the extended family members received similarly scaled-back inheritances, comfortable but far from the windfall they had anticipated. With each new provision, the atmosphere in the room grew more strained. Aunt Eleanor's complexion flushed with suppressed anger. Thomas repeatedly loosened his tie as if it were choking him. Victoria whispered furiously to her husband. Elizabeth openly scrolled through her phone, apparently checking her investment accounts. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, expecting nothing, mentally calculating how soon I could politely leave and return to the meaningful work waiting at Verdant Solutions. I had already received the most valuable inheritance grandfather could give, his belief in me and the investment that had helped launch my company. Anything beyond that seemed superfluous. Then Mr. Chen reached the final section of the will, and the room went completely still. As to the remainder of my estate, including my controlling interest in Montgomery Holdings, my personal investment portfolio, real estate holdings not otherwise specified, and liquid assets, a combined value of approximately $87 million, I leave entirely to my grandson, Noah James Montgomery, with the following condition: that he use these resources to further the values of innovation, sustainability, and human dignity that his parents exemplified and that he has demonstrated in his own endeavors. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Thomas's Mont Blanc pen clattering onto the polished table. I sat frozen, certain I had misheard, while around me the family tableau transformed into a portrait of collective shock. Uncle Frederick recovered first. "This is preposterous," he sputtered, face flushing dark red. "There must be some mistake. Noah has no experience managing this level of wealth or business operations. Harrison couldn't have intended—" "My client's intentions were explicitly clear," Mr. Chen interrupted, his tone polite but allowing no argument. "Not only in the will itself, but in extensive conversations documenting his reasoning. I assure you, the will has been reviewed by multiple legal experts and is entirely sound." "We'll contest it," Thomas declared, looking to his father for confirmation. "Undue influence, diminished capacity. There are grounds—" "You are welcome to pursue that course," Mr. Chen replied calmly. "However, I should note that your grandfather anticipated this reaction. The will includes a no-contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will automatically forfeits their entire inheritance, regardless of the challenge's outcome." This silenced Thomas immediately. Even in their shock and anger, the family's financial calculation remained accurate. A guaranteed, modest inheritance was preferable to the risk of receiving nothing. Throughout this exchange, I remained silent, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Not just the money, though the figure was staggering, but the profound statement of trust that grandfather had made, choosing me as the steward of his life's work and the values he had hoped to instill in his family. "If there are no further questions," Mr. Chen continued, "I have additional documents for Mr. Noah Montgomery regarding the transfer of assets. The rest of you may contact my office tomorrow regarding the specifics of your individual bequests." The dismissal was polite but unmistakable. One by one, family members rose, their expressions a complex mixture of shock, resentment, calculation, and in a few cases, dawning reassessment as they looked at me. No longer the family disappointment, but suddenly the holder of the Montgomery fortune. No one spoke to me directly. Uncle Frederick guided Aunt Eleanor from the room with a hand at her elbow. both of them staring straight ahead as if afraid eye contact might shatter their composure. Thomas followed, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. Victoria whispered, something to her husband that made him glance back at me with newfound interest. Elizabeth was the last to leave, lingering by the door with an expression I couldn't quite interpret before she too disappeared. When the room had emptied except for Mr. Chen and his colleagues, I finally found my voice. "I don't understand," I said. "Why me?" Mr. Chen smiled slightly, the first real emotion he had displayed. "Your grandfather was an excellent judge of character, Mr. Montgomery. He believed you possessed the qualities necessary to manage his legacy responsibly: intelligence, integrity, and perspective about what wealth is for." "But I have no experience running a corporation the size of Montgomery Holdings," I protested. "I'm an environmental engineer. I run a startup with 12 employees." "Your grandfather didn't expect you to personally manage day-to-day operations," Mr. Chen explained, opening another folder. "He established a management structure that allows you to maintain ultimate ownership while delegating operational authority to competent executives. Not your uncle and cousin, I should add. He selected a team he believed would respect your vision while providing the necessary expertise." He pushed the folder toward me. "This outlines the transition plan. You'll have full access to your grandfather's advisors, including myself, and the authority to make changes as you deem appropriate. He trusted your judgment, Mr. Montgomery." I stared at the document, overwhelmed by the responsibility it represented. "And if I don't want it? If I would prefer to focus on my own company?" "That option was anticipated as well," Mr. Chen replied. "There are provisions for establishing a foundation that would manage the assets according to guidelines you would help create, allowing you to maintain oversight while focusing on your personal ventures. Your grandfather was quite thorough in considering various scenarios." Of course he was. Grandfather had always been meticulous in his planning, seeing multiple moves ahead like a chess grandmaster. This final move, elevating me while simultaneously checking the ambitions of Uncle Frederick and Thomas, reflected that strategic brilliance. But as I sat in that conference room, surrounded by the formal trappings of wealth transfer, I realized that grandfather's decision went beyond strategy. It represented a profound statement of values, a recognition that the true Montgomery legacy wasn't the fortune itself, but the principles it could serve when placed in the right hands. I gathered the documents, thanked Mr. Chen for his guidance, and left the office in a state of dazed contemplation. The world looked unchanged. The same autumn sunshine, the same city traffic, the same pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalk. Yet everything had fundamentally shifted. In the space of an hour, I had gone from a modestly successful entrepreneur with a promising technology to one of the wealthiest individuals in the state, with all the power and responsibility that entailed. As I stood on the steps of the law office, considering what came next, I recalled grandfather's words from our last meaningful conversation. "True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who remains beside you when you have nothing." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been treated as if I had nothing of value to offer the Montgomery legacy. Now, with everything suddenly at my disposal, I wondered who would remain beside me, and what kind of legacy I would choose to build with the trust grandfather had placed in my hands. The following days unfolded in a surreal haze. I returned to the modest apartment above our laboratory, surrounded by the familiar, unmatched furniture from second-hand stores, whiteboards covered in chemical formulas, stacks of research papers while trying to absorb the unfamiliar reality of my new circumstances. According to Mr. Chen's documentation, I now controlled assets worth more than I could have earned in multiple lifetimes of scientific research. Sleep evaded me that first night. I lay awake watching moonlight create shifting patterns on my ceiling, thinking of grandfather, not the business titan whose portrait hung in the Montgomery Holdings lobby, but the man who had taught me to fish with infinite patience, who had listened to my childhood dreams with genuine interest, who had seen something in me that even I hadn't fully recognized. Why me? I had asked Mr. Chen. The question echoed in my mind as dawn approached, bringing with it a different question that felt more important. What now? Morning arrived with a series of increasingly urgent text messages from my business partners at Verdant Solutions. Noah, why are there reporters outside our building? Someone from Financial Times called asking for a statement about your inheritance windfall. What the hell is happening? News traveled fast in financial circles. By the time I arrived at our facility, 3 news vans had parked across the street, and a small cluster of reporters hovered near our entrance like gulls eyeing potential food. I slipped in through the loading dock, avoiding their questions until I could speak with my team. Marcus and Aiko, my co-founders and closest friends since our MIT days, waited in our small conference room. Confusion, concern, and undisguised curiosity played across their faces as I entered. So, Marcus began, leaning forward over his coffee mug, apparently you're a secret billionaire? Millionaire, I corrected, dropping into a chair. And it's not a secret. It's just new. I explained the situation as simply as possible. My grandfather's passing, the unexpected inheritance, the family's reaction. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from confusion to astonishment. Holy shit, Aiko whispered when I finished. So you own Montgomery Holdings now? The same Montgomery Holdings that's on the Fortune 500 list? Among other things, I confirmed. But that doesn't change anything here. Verdant Solutions is still my priority, my life's work. Marcus and Aiko exchanged glances, a silent communication, born of years working side by side through late nights and early breakthroughs. Noah, Marcus said gently, everything has changed. You have responsibilities now that go far beyond algae biofuels. And opportunities, Aiko added, her scientific precision evident even in this extraordinary conversation. Montgomery Holdings has global reach, political influence, the capacity to implement environmental technologies at scales we've only dreamed about. Their perspectives hit me with unexpected force. I'd been so focused on the personal implications of the inheritance, the family dynamics, the sudden wealth, that I hadn't fully considered the broader implications. Montgomery Holdings employed thousands of people across multiple industries. Its investment decisions influenced markets. Its practices impacted communities and ecosystems worldwide. I need time to think, I said finally, to figure out the right approach. Take all the time you need, Marcus replied. We've got the production issues under control for now. Just keep us in the loop, okay? This affects all of us. He was right, of course. My decisions now would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond my immediate circle. The weight of that responsibility settled over me as I retreated to my office, closed the door, and began the process of truly understanding what I had inherited. Over the next week, I immersed myself in learning. Mr. Chen arranged a series of private briefings with grandfather's most trusted advisors, the CFO of Montgomery Holdings, the head of the family's private investment office, the foundation director, the legal team. Each meeting revealed new layers of complexity in the empire grandfather had built and new insights into the man himself. Your grandfather began shifting investments toward sustainable industries 3 years ago, the investment director informed me, displaying portfolio charts showing significant positions in renewable energy, water conservation technologies, and green infrastructure. He was quite adamant about it, despite some resistance from the board. Harrison quietly funded educational initiatives in every community where we operate major facilities, the foundation director explained. Scholarships, teacher training, school infrastructure, all with minimal publicity. He believed in creating opportunity, not collecting accolades. Your grandfather maintained personal oversight of employee benefits across all divisions, the CFO noted. He insisted on healthcare coverage substantially above industry standards and rejected multiple cost-cutting proposals that would have reduced staff. These revelations painted a picture of a man whose public persona, the hard-driving business, a tycoon, had obscured a more nuanced approach to wealth and influence. Grandfather had been implementing a vision of corporate responsibility long before it became fashionable, quietly shaping Montgomery Holdings into something more aligned with my own values than I had realized. Meanwhile, the family's reaction to my inheritance took predictable forms. Uncle Frederick and Thomas announced their resignations from Montgomery Holdings with a tersely worded press release expressing confidence that the company's strong management team would maintain stability during this transition. The subtext was clear. They expected me to fail spectacularly without their guidance. Aunt Eleanor called exactly once, her voice brittle with forced politeness as she suggested we discuss arrangements for family access to certain traditional vacation properties. When I explained that those properties had been donated to conservation, trusts per grandfather's explicit wishes, she hung up without saying goodbye. Victoria's husband, the senator's son with political ambitions of his own, sent a surprisingly warm email congratulating me and suggesting lunch to explore potential synergies between Montgomery Holdings and various public-private initiatives. His transparent networking attempt at least had the virtue of honest self-interest. Elizabeth's response surprised me most. She appeared at my apartment door unannounced one evening, dressed casually rather than in her usual designer attire, bearing a bottle of good scotch and 2 glasses. "Peace offering," she said when I opened the door, "or at least a temporary truce." I let her in, curious about her intentions. She settled onto my worn couch, looking around the modest apartment with genuine interest rather than the judgment I had expected. "So this is how environmental engineering rock stars live," she observed, pouring scotch into both glasses. "Honestly, it's more appealing than the mausoleum we grew up in." She handed me a glass and raised her own. To grandfather, who apparently knew us all better than we knew ourselves. We drank, the scotch burning pleasantly as it went down. Elizabeth studied me over the rim of her glass, her typically aloof expression replaced by something more contemplative. "You're wondering why I'm here," she said finally. "The truth is, I'm not entirely sure myself. Partly curiosity, partly because you're the only family member I'm not currently furious with." "Because I inherited everything?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. She laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "No, because you never pretended to be something you weren't. The rest of us spent years performing for grandfather, competing for his approval, positioning ourselves as worthy heirs. You just lived your life, did work you believed in, and apparently that's what he valued all along." Her candor was unexpected. In our limited interactions over the years, Elizabeth had always presented the same carefully curated image as the rest of the family. Polished, ambitious, slightly bored with anything outside her immediate interests. "I never thought he was paying that much attention," I admitted. "He noticed everything," Elizabeth replied, staring into her glass. "I just thought he noticed the wrong things, or valued the wrong things. Shows what I know." She looked up, with a wry smile. "So what are you going to do with it all? Aside from making us all look like greedy, superficial assholes by comparison." "I'm still figuring that out," I answered honestly. "It's a lot of responsibility." "That right there," she pointed at me with her glass, "is exactly why he picked you. Anyone else in the family would have said, 'It's a lot of opportunity,' or 'It's a lot of money.' You immediately think about responsibility." We talked for hours that night, more openly than we ever had during our childhood under the same roof. Elizabeth revealed frustrations with her fashion brand, how investor expectations had pushed her toward luxury markets when her true interest lay in sustainable materials and ethical manufacturing. I shared the challenges of commercializing environmental technologies in markets still dominated by cheaper, more polluting alternatives. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Whatever you decide to do with grandfather's empire, I hope you'll remember that not everyone in the family is like my parents or Thomas. Some of us might actually be worth knowing." Her visit marked the beginning of a subtle shift in my thinking. Until then, I had been approaching my inheritance primarily as a personal challenge. How would I manage this wealth while staying true to my own values? But Elizabeth's perspective reminded me that grandfather's decision had implications for the entire family system he had created, including members who might be potential allies rather than obstacles. The following day, I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. I called Mr. Chen and asked him to arrange a meeting with the full executive leadership of Montgomery Holdings, not just the C-suite, but the division heads, the research directors, the regional managers. I wanted to understand the organization from multiple perspectives before determining any course of action. "An unusual approach," Mr. Chen observed, "but certainly feasible. Your grandfather would approve, I think." The meeting took place at Montgomery Holdings headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the city's financial district. I arrived early, slipping into grandfather's, now my, corner office to center myself before facing dozens of executives who would be scrutinizing their new boss with understandable concern. The office felt both familiar and strange. I had visited grandfather here occasionally, but had never imagined occupying this space myself. Family photos lined one wall, including, I noticed with surprise, several of me at various ages displaying my science fair projects, graduating from MIT, breaking ground on the Verdant Solutions facility. He had been proud of me, even when I'd felt most distant from the family legacy. The realization strengthened my resolve for the task ahead. The conference room fell silent when I entered, 50 pairs of eyes tracking my movement to the head of the table. I recognized some faces from family events or news coverage. Others were strangers who nevertheless controlled significant portions of the Montgomery empire. All displayed varying degrees of uncertainty about the young environmental engineer who had unexpectedly become their principal. "Thank you for coming," I began, positioning myself at the conference table rather than at the elevated presenter's platform. "I know the past weeks have created significant uncertainty for everyone in this room and throughout the organization. Today is about beginning to address that uncertainty, though I want to be clear that I don't have all the answers yet." I paused, surveying the room. "What I do have are questions. I want to understand this organization, not just its balance sheets and organizational charts, but its people, its culture, its potential. Before making any major decisions about Montgomery Holdings' future, I need your insights and expertise." The tension in the room shifted slightly, not disappearing, but transforming from anxiety about potential upheaval to cautious curiosity about this unorthodox approach. "So here's what I propose," I continued. "Over the next month, I'll be meeting with each division individually, learning your operations, challenges, and opportunities. I'm not coming as an outsider intent on immediate transformation, but as someone committed to understanding what works, what doesn't, and how we might evolve together." The CFO, a veteran executive who had served under grandfather for decades, spoke first. "With respect, Mr. Montgomery, the markets expect decisive leadership. Prolonged uncertainty could impact our stock price and stakeholder confidence." I nodded, acknowledging his concern. A fair point. So let me be decisive about this. Montgomery Holdings will continue all current operations without disruption while this assessment proceeds. No layoffs, no restructuring, no major policy changes during this period. The company is financially sound and operationally effective. I see no need for hasty decisions that might damage what's working well. This commitment visibly relieved many in the room. I continued. "However, I will tell you candidly that I believe the future of this company, indeed, of all successful companies, lies in sustainable practices, ethical treatment of employees and communities, and positive environmental impact. Those values will guide my long-term vision for Montgomery Holdings. The sustainability director, a woman who had been hired by grandfather 2 years earlier over Uncle Frederick's objections, straightened in her chair. Your grandfather began significant initiatives in that direction. We have proposals ready for expanding those efforts if you're interested. Very interested, I confirmed. In fact, I'd like to start our divisional meetings with sustainability, followed by human resources. The foundation of my approach will be people and planet alongside profit. For the next 3 hours, I listened more than I spoke, absorbing information about operations spanning multiple industries and geographies. Some executives clearly viewed me with skepticism, the inexperienced heir who would need careful management. Others seemed genuinely intrigued by the possibility of new direction. A few, particularly those who had clashed with Uncle Frederick's more traditional approach, displayed cautious optimism. By the end of the meeting, I had established clear next steps, a structured series of deep dives into each division, a commitment to transparent communication throughout the organization, and the formation of a transition advisory team that included both veteran executives and younger managers with fresh perspectives. As the room cleared, the CFO lingered behind. Harold Watkins had been with Montgomery Holdings since before I was born, a numbers man with a reputation for both fiscal conservatism and absolute integrity. Your approach today was unexpected, he said, studying me with thoughtful eyes. Frederick would have arrived with a 10-point plan already developed and a list of executives to replace. I'm not Frederick, I replied simply. No, you're not, he agreed. You're actually more like your grandfather than anyone realizes. He built this company by listening first, then acting decisively once he understood the landscape. He extended his hand. I wasn't sure what to expect from Harrison's choice, but I think I'm beginning to understand it. That conversation marked another turning point. I left headquarters with a clearer sense of purpose than I'd had since the will reading. Grandfather hadn't simply left me wealth. He had entrusted me with an instrument for change. Montgomery Holdings could become a model for how large corporations might operate in a world facing climate challenges, resource constraints, and growing inequality, if I had the wisdom and courage to guide it there. Back at Verdant Solutions that evening, I found Marcus and Aiko waiting in our small break room, concern evident in their expressions. The Montgomery leadership meeting was all over business Twitter, Marcus explained. People are speculating about everything from mass layoffs to complete green rebranding. Neither is happening immediately, I assured them. I'm taking a methodical approach, learning before acting. And Verdant? Aiko asked. What happens to our work now? The question deserved a thoughtful answer. Our biofuel technology represented years of shared effort, countless late nights and early breakthroughs, a vision we had built together from scientific first principles to commercial viability. Verdant Solutions will continue its mission, I said firmly. In fact, I see potential for accelerating our impact through strategic connections with Montgomery Resources, not by absorption, but through partnership. Their expressions remained guarded. I understood their concern. Would their friend and co-founder become distracted by newfound wealth and power? Would our shared vision be compromised by corporate considerations? Look, I said, perching on the edge of the break room table. I need your help navigating this. Both of you understand the science and the market better than anyone. If we can maintain Verdant's independence while leveraging Montgomery's scale, we might achieve in years what would otherwise take decades. And if there's a conflict between Verdant's mission and Montgomery's interests, Marcus asked pointedly, then Verdant's mission takes priority, I answered without hesitation. Grandfather left me control specifically because he believed in the values that drive our work here. I won't betray that trust. Something shifted in their expressions, not complete relief, but a willingness to see how this unexpected development might unfold. 1 month, Iko proposed. You focus on understanding Montgomery Holdings while Marcus and I handle operations. Here. Then we reassess together and develop a strategic plan for how Verdant and Montgomery might complement each other without compromising our core mission. With complete transparency about any potential conflicts of interest, Marcus added. Agreed, I said, on all points. They nodded, the tension between us easing. We were navigating uncharted waters, but the foundation of trust we had built over years of collaboration remained solid beneath the surface uncertainty. As they left for the evening, I remained in the break room, contemplating the path ahead. The past days had been overwhelming. Grief for grandfather mingled with the staggering responsibility of his bequest and the complex family dynamics his decision had exposed. Yet beneath the turbulence, I felt something unexpected taking root, a sense of clarity and purpose stronger than anything I had experienced before. Grandfather had entrusted me with more than wealth. He had given me a platform from which to enact the values both he and my parents had instilled. The question was no longer, why me? But how can I honor this trust most effectively? That night, I began sketching what would eventually become the Montgomery Transformation Initiative, a comprehensive plan to evolve the family business from a traditional corporate entity focused primarily on shareholder returns to a model of stakeholder capitalism that prioritized environmental sustainability, employee well-being, and community benefit alongside financial performance. The path wouldn't be easy. I would face resistance from market analysts accustomed to quarterly profit maximization, from executives comfortable with established practices, from family members who viewed my inheritance as an unconscionable disruption of the proper order. But for the first time since grandfather's passing, I felt equal to the challenge. His final gift hadn't been merely financial capital, but something far more valuable: the confidence that I possessed the character and capability to transform that capital into meaningful change. As dawn approached, I finally closed my notebook and moved to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere beyond the urban skyline, a new day was beginning. For Montgomery Holdings, for Verdant Solutions, and for me. A day of possibility that grandfather had seen even when I couldn't see it myself. 3 months after inheriting Montgomery Holdings, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive office I had finally begun to think of as mine, watching storm clouds gather over the city. The metaphor wasn't lost on me as I prepared for the most significant confrontation since the will reading. The quarterly board meeting scheduled for that afternoon would be my first opportunity to present the Montgomery Transformation Initiative to the full governing body, a group primarily composed of grandfather's contemporaries, industry veterans with traditional views on corporate purpose and shareholder primacy. They had granted me a grace period out of respect for grandfather's memory and the legal clarity of his bequest, but their patience was visibly wearing thin. Market analysts are questioning the strategic direction, the chairman had informed me during our preparatory call the previous day, his diplomatic tone barely concealing his own concerns. Several significant institutional investors have requested clarity on long-term vision, particularly regarding the apparent shift in investment priorities. In other words, explain yourself, young man, or face a potential revolt. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. My executive assistant, Carmen, entered with the portfolio I had requested, a comprehensive analysis of Montgomery Holdings' environmental impact across all divisions. The sustainability team just delivered the final numbers, she said, placing the binder on my desk. And Mr. Watkins called to confirm he'll join you 15 minutes before the meeting to review the financial projections. I thanked her, appreciating both her efficiency and her calm support throughout the chaotic transition period. Carmen had served as grandfather's assistant for 12 years and knew the organization's inner workings better than almost anyone. Her decision to stay on despite the uncertainty my succession had created provided invaluable continuity. The board members have begun arriving, she added. They're gathering in the main conference room. Mr. Chen called to say he's running. Slightly late, but will arrive before the meeting starts. Mr. Chen's presence was important, not just as the executor of grandfather's will, but as someone who understood his long-term intentions for the company. I needed all the allies I could muster for what promised to be a contentious discussion. Perfect, I replied. Please let Harold know he can come up whenever he's ready. As Carmen departed, I turned my attention to the sustainability report. The data confirmed what I had suspected during my divisional deep dives. Montgomery Holdings had a substantial environmental footprint across its operations, from carbon emissions to water usage to waste generation. Grandfather had begun initiatives to address these impacts, but they remained largely peripheral to core business strategy. My transformation plan would change that fundamentally, integrating sustainability into every aspect of operations and investment decisions. The challenge would be convincing the board that this approach enhanced rather than sacrificed long-term value. Harold Watkins arrived precisely 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored gray suit, his expression revealing nothing as he settled into a chair across from my desk. The financial models are sound, he began without preamble, assuming the market conditions outlined in your projections. The initial capital expenditure is significant, but the projected returns meet our established thresholds by year 3, with substantial improvements in years 5 through 10. I had expected nothing less. Harold's fiscal conservatism was legendary, but so was his mathematical rigor. If he certified that the numbers worked, they worked. What about the board's likely objections? I asked. Harold's expression softened. Slightly. They'll focus on short-term implications for shareholder returns and quarterly performance. The temporary reduction in dividends while we fund the transition will be particularly contentious. And your assessment of those concerns? They're valid within a conventional framework, he replied carefully, but increasingly misaligned with market realities. Regulatory trends, consumer preferences, and investor priorities are all shifting toward sustainability. Your approach isn't just ethically sound, it's strategically prudent. His endorsement meant more than he probably realized. Over the past months, Harold had transformed from a skeptical observer of my succession to a key advisor, offering candid feedback that helped refine my vision while respecting my ultimate authority. Unlike many executives who had aligned with Uncle Frederick's more traditional approach, Harold valued competence over hierarchy and evidence over authority. Thank you, I said simply. Shall we head down? The main conference room hummed with subdued conversation when we arrived. Board members clustered in small groups that fell silent as I entered. 14 men and 3 women, average age 64, collectively representing centuries of business experience and billions in personal wealth. Their expressions ranged from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism as I took my position at the head of the table. The chairman, William Hargrove, called the meeting to order with practiced efficiency. After dispensing with routine, approvals and committee reports, he turned to the main agenda item with pointed emphasis. And now, Mr. Montgomery will present his strategic vision for the company's future direction. The subtle emphasis on Mr. Montgomery, rather than my first name, conveyed volumes about the room's power dynamics. I was still the newcomer, the untested inheritor rather than the proven leader in their eyes. I rose, activating the presentation display embedded in the conference table. The Montgomery Transformation Initiative logo appeared on screens around the room, a stylized M formed from interconnected elements representing people, planet, and prosperity. Thank you, Chairman Hargrove. Distinguished board members, I appreciate your patience during this transition period as I've worked to understand Montgomery Holdings' operations and develop a coherent vision for our future. I paused, making eye contact with key board members, before continuing. The plan I'm presenting today represents both continuity with my grandfather's legacy and evolution to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing world. The Montgomery Transformation Initiative is a comprehensive approach to ensuring this company's leadership position for generations to come. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the plan in detail, transitioning all operations to carbon neutrality within 5 years, redirecting investment capital toward emerging technologies in renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure, implementing industry-leading employee benefits, including profit sharing at all levels, and establishing the Montgomery Foundation as a global leader in climate resilience for vulnerable communities. As I spoke, I watched the board members' reactions carefully. A few nodded thoughtfully at particularly compelling data points. Others frowned at projected short-term costs or ambitious timelines. Most maintained poker faces, revealing nothing, until the formal discussion period. In summary, I concluded, this initiative positions Montgomery Holdings at the forefront of the inevitable transition to a more sustainable and equitable economy. It honors our legacy of innovation while securing our relevance in a future that will reward forward-thinking leadership. I welcome your questions and perspectives. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but felt infinitely longer. Then, Walter Thornhill, the longest-serving board member and grandfather's former college roommate, cleared his throat. "Young man," he began, his deep voice carrying the gravitas of his 83 years, "you've clearly put considerable thought into this proposal. I respect that. But Montgomery Holdings wasn't built on idealism. It was built on pragmatic business decisions that generated consistent returns for shareholders. This plan appears to prioritize social objectives over fiduciary responsibility." Several board members nodded in agreement. The criticism was exactly what I had anticipated, framing sustainability as a charitable diversion rather than a business imperative. "With respect, Mr. Thornhill," I replied, "that's a false dichotomy that no longer reflects market realities. The companies that will thrive in the coming decades are those that address environmental and social challenges as core business opportunities, not peripheral concerns." I highlighted a specific slide showing performance data for industry peers who had implemented similar transitions. These companies have outperformed market averages by 32% over the past 5 years, precisely because they recognize that sustainability drives innovation, attracts talent, reduces risk, and creates competitive advantage. Rebecca Chen, one of the few female board members and the CEO of a major tech company, leaned forward. "I agree with the general direction, but your timeline seems extraordinarily aggressive. Most companies implementing similar transformations plan for 10 to 15-year transitions to minimize disruption." "The timeline is ambitious by design," I acknowledged. "The climate crisis isn't waiting, and neither are regulatory changes or market shifts. Companies that move decisively now will capture first-mover advantages and avoid the escalating costs of delayed action." The discussion intensified from there, with board members raising concerns about everything from implementation, challenges to competitive risks to shareholder reactions. I addressed each point directly, backing my responses with data from the extensive research my team had conducted during the planning phase. Throughout the exchange, I noticed a gradual shift in the room's atmosphere. The initial skepticism hadn't disappeared, but it had evolved into something more nuanced, a genuine engagement with the substance of the proposal rather than reflexive resistance to change. As the scheduled discussion period neared its conclusion, the chairman intervened. "This has been a productive conversation, but we need to determine next steps. The proposed initiative represents a significant departure from established strategy and would typically warrant extensive committee review before any formal decision." This was the procedural delay I had anticipated, kicking the proposal to committees where it could be effectively stalled indefinitely. Before I could respond, Harold Watkins spoke up. "As CFO, I've conducted a thorough financial analysis of the proposed initiative," he stated, activating his own presentation on the conference screens. "The modeling indicates that while short-term adjustments will be required, The long-term financial benefits substantially outweigh the transitional costs. Furthermore, our major lending agreements include sustainability performance metrics that would be positively impacted, potentially reducing capital costs across our operations. His intervention shifted the conversation from philosophical differences to practical financial considerations, familiar territory for the board. Several members who had appeared resistant began asking more technical questions about implementation phases and return calculations. Then Mr. Chen, who had been observing quietly from his position at the side of the room, requested permission to address the board. The chairman nodded, curiosity evident in his expression. As executor of Harrison Montgomery's estate and his longtime legal advisor, I feel it appropriate to provide some context regarding his intentions for the company's future, Mr. Chen began. While client confidentiality prevents me from sharing specific conversations, I can confirm that Harrison undertook extensive research into sustainable business models during his final years. The changes initiated under his leadership, which some board members questioned at the time, were early steps in a longer transformation he envisioned. He paused, his measured tone giving weight to his next statement. The selection of Noah Montgomery as his successor was a deliberate choice to accelerate this transformation, not merely a familial bequest. Harrison believed deeply that companies failing to address sustainability would eventually become obsolete, regardless of their historical success. This revelation created a palpable shift in the room. Several older board members who had known grandfather personally appeared particularly affected by this confirmation of his strategic intent. The chairman's expression remained unreadable as he called for final comments before bringing the matter to a vote. Walter Thornhill, who had raised the first objection, spoke again. I've served on this board for 27 years because I believed in Harrison's vision. If this transformation represents the continuation of that vision rather than its abandonment, I'm inclined to support it, with appropriate oversight and milestone reviews. His statement opened the floodgates for other longtime board members to reconsider their initial resistance. When the chairman finally called the vote, the Montgomery Transformation Initiative was approved by a margin of 14-3, with the stipulation that quarterly progress reviews would be conducted by a special oversight committee. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached me individually, some offering congratulations, others sharing specific concerns or suggestions, a few simply observing me with newfound curiosity. The chairman was the last to speak with me, his handshake firmer than it had been at the meeting's start. Your grandfather was known for calculated boldness, he said. It appears that quality may be hereditary. Implement this well, and you'll have my full support going forward. Later that evening, as I shared the results with Marcus and Aiko over dinner at our favorite local restaurant, their reactions reflected the magnitude of the day's achievement. They actually approved it? The whole thing? Marcus asked incredulously, pausing with his fork midair. I would have bet serious money they'd gut at least half the sustainability targets. They recognized it was a package deal, I explained. Each element reinforces the others. The employee initiatives support recruitment and retention of top talent needed for innovation. The carbon reduction drives operational efficiency. The community investments build social license and reduce regulatory risk. Together, they create more value than any single component could alone. Aiko studied me thoughtfully. You've changed, she observed. Not in a bad way, but there's something different in how you approach things now. More integrated thinking. Her observation struck me as profoundly accurate. The past months had transformed not just my circumstances, but my perspective. Where I had once seen business and environmental concerns as separate domains requiring painful trade-offs, I now recognized the potential for alignment that served both simultaneously. Where I had once viewed corporate structures as inherently resistant to change, I now saw them as complex systems that could be redirected when approached, with strategic patience and clear evidence. I've had good teachers, I replied, raising my glass in a toast to my friends and colleagues. And I'm still learning. The conversation shifted to Verdant Solutions' progress. With Marcus and Aiko handling day-to-day operations, our biofuel technology had continued advancing, with promising results from the latest production scale-up. More significantly, preliminary discussions with Montgomery Holdings' energy division had identified potential synergies that could accelerate commercialization without compromising Verdant's mission or independence. We could actually achieve commercial viability 2 years ahead of our original timeline, Aiko explained, her typically reserved demeanor giving way to genuine excitement. The technical challenges haven't changed, but access to Montgomery's testing facilities and distribution networks changes the economics dramatically. This was precisely the type of collaboration I had envisioned, leveraging corporate scale and resources to accelerate environmental innovation without sacrificing the entrepreneurial spirit that drove it. The model could be replicated across multiple sectors, creating pathways for promising technologies to achieve meaningful impact more quickly. As we walked back to the Verdant facility after dinner, Marcus hung back slightly to match my pace. "You know," he said quietly, "when this inheritance thing first happened, I was worried we'd lose you to the corporate world, that the Noah who was passionate about changing things would get swallowed by boardrooms and balance sheets." "I had the same fear," I admitted. "But that's not what's happening," he continued. "Instead, you're changing the corporate world, making it work for the things we've always believed in." He shook his head with a bemused smile. "Your grandfather was one smart old man." His observation stayed with me as I returned to my apartment later that night. The approval of the Montgomery Transformation Initiative marked a significant milestone, but it was merely the beginning of the real work. Implementation would require sustained effort across multiple fronts: technological innovation, organizational, culture change, stakeholder engagement, policy advocacy, all coordinated toward a coherent vision of what business could become. As I reviewed notes for the next day's executive team meeting, my phone chimed with an incoming email. The sender's name gave me pause: Frederick Montgomery. My uncle had maintained radio silence since his resignation, communicating only through attorneys regarding his continuing board seat, which he had retained despite stepping down from his executive role. The message was brief: "Congratulations on the board vote. Your approach differs from what I would have chosen, but Harrison clearly saw something in you that the rest of us missed. If you're amenable, I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss how my experience might support your transition, without management authority but perhaps as an advisor in specific areas. Regardless of your decision, I wish you success." The email wasn't warm exactly, but its tone differed markedly from the cold fury that had characterized our last interaction. Whether motivated by genuine reflection or pragmatic recognition of changed circumstances, it represented a potential thawing in family relations that I hadn't anticipated. I drafted a careful reply, expressing appreciation for his outreach and suggesting coffee to explore potential advisory roles that might leverage his institutional knowledge without recreating previous conflicts. As I sent the message, I realized how much my approach to the family had evolved, from wounded avoidance to confident engagement based on clear boundaries. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of activity as implementation of the Montgomery Transformation Initiative began in earnest. I assembled cross-functional teams for each major component, pairing experienced Montgomery executives with external experts in sustainable business practices. We established concrete metrics and milestones, developed communication strategies for different stakeholder groups, and created feedback mechanisms to identify and address emerging challenges. The work was demanding but deeply fulfilling. Each day brought new problems to solve, new connections to forge, new possibilities to explore. I found myself drawing on everything from my scientific training to the business education grandfather had subtly provided over years of conversations, synthesizing technical understanding with strategic vision in ways that energized both me and the teams I led. Most rewarding was witnessing the shift in organizational culture as employees at all levels engaged with the transformation. While some executives remained skeptical or resistant, many others embraced the opportunity to align their professional contributions with larger purpose. Junior staff were particularly responsive, with engagement surveys showing significant improvements in motivation and commitment. "This is why I got into business in the first place," a young manager in our consumer products division told me during a site visit. "To solve real problems that matter, not just to move numbers on a spreadsheet. For the first time, I feel like my work has meaning beyond the quarterly results." Comments like these reinforced my growing conviction that the narrative of inevitable conflict between business success and societal benefit was not merely wrong but harmful, discouraging precisely the innovation and engagement needed to address our most pressing challenges. 6 months after the board's approval, we held a company-wide town hall to share progress updates and recognize early achievements. The event was simultaneously broadcast to Montgomery facilities worldwide, with interactive elements allowing employees from different locations to participate virtually. Standing on the auditorium stage, looking out at faces both physically present and projected on screens, I felt a profound sense of responsibility mixed with genuine optimism. The path ahead remained challenging, with resistance to overcome and complex problems to solve, but the momentum of collective purpose had begun to build in ways that seemed increasingly unstoppable. "Today marks an important milestone in Montgomery Holdings' evolution," I began. "Not because we've completed our transformation. We're still in the early stages of a journey that will continue for years, but because we can now see concrete evidence that our vision is not just aspirational, but achievable." I highlighted specific accomplishments: a manufacturing facility that had reduced carbon emissions by 40% while increasing productivity, a financial services division that had developed innovative financing for community renewable energy projects, a technology team that had created breakthrough battery storage solutions now moving toward commercialization. "These achievements belong to all of you," I continued. "They reflect your creativity, your dedication, and your willingness to question assumptions about how business must operate. Together, we're demonstrating that prosperity can be aligned with purpose, not as separate initiatives but as integrated strategy." As the event concluded, with employees breaking into discussion groups to explore next-stage opportunities, I found myself reflecting on grandfather's words from our last meaningful conversation. "True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who remains beside you when you have nothing." The inheritance that had initially seemed primarily financial had revealed its deeper dimensions. Grandfather had given me not just control of a corporation, but the opportunity to catalyze transformation, to gather others around a vision of business as a force for regeneration rather than extraction, for solution rather than exploitation. The true wealth wasn't in the balance sheets, but in the growing community of colleagues, partners, and allies committed to realizing that vision together. Later that evening, as I reviewed media coverage of our transformation initiative, an article headline captured this emerging reality perfectly: "Montgomery Holdings, from family dynasty to purpose-driven movement." The reporter had insightfully recognized what was becoming increasingly clear to me: that the company's evolution transcended typical corporate change to become something with broader cultural significance. The inheritance that had once seemed a burden of expectation had become a platform for impact far beyond anything I could have achieved alone. By accepting that responsibility and approaching it with both humility and conviction, I had discovered capabilities within myself that I hadn't known existed, and helped others discover similar potential within themselves. That realization wasn't an endpoint but a launching pad for the work still to come, work that would continue redefining what wealth truly meant, not just for one family or company, but potentially for business as a whole. 2 years after inheriting Montgomery Holdings, I stood at the edge of a vast construction site on what had once been an abandoned industrial complex in my hometown. The morning sun cast long shadows across the property as workers positioned solar panels atop newly constructed buildings. Heavy equipment moved methodically across the landscape, transforming what had been a toxic brownfield into the Montgomery Innovation Campus, our most ambitious project to date, and the physical embodiment of our transformation vision. Construction is 3 weeks ahead of schedule, explained Darius Jackson, the project director and a hometown success story himself. The renewable energy systems will be fully operational before the manufacturing facilities open, making this our first zero-carbon production campus from day one. I nodded appreciatively, studying the plans spread across the temporary table. The campus represented everything we'd been working toward: ecological restoration combined with economic revitalization, cutting-edge technology deployed to create meaningful jobs in a community that had suffered from industrial decline, research facilities designed to accelerate the commercialization of sustainable innovations. Most significant was the central complex, already taking shape at the heart of the campus, the permanent home for Verdant Solutions, now expanded from our original team of 3 to over 70 scientists, engineers, and production specialists. Our algae biofuel technology had progressed from promising research to commercial reality, with pilot projects demonstrating viability in industrial applications where traditional renewable energy sources struggled to meet demands. The local hiring program has exceeded targets, Darius continued, gesturing toward the construction teams. 73% of workers are from within 30 miles. The Advanced Manufacturing Training Program is at capacity with 300 participants, most of whom will transition directly to permanent positions when production begins. His pride was justified. Darius had grown up in these neighborhoods, left for college on a scholarship, built a successful engineering career, and then returned when he heard about our campus project. "I always wanted to help rebuild this community," he had told me during his interview. "I just needed the right opportunity." Creating those opportunities, not just here but in communities around the world, had become a central focus of the Montgomery Transformation Initiative. While media attention often focused on our environmental innovations or governance reforms, the human impact remained the most meaningful measure of success in my view. My phone vibrated with an incoming message from Carmen. Reminder, family. Foundation quarterly meeting at 2 p.m. Thomas confirmed attendance. The notification stirred mixed emotions. The Montgomery Family Foundation represented both our greatest success in healing family divisions and the most persistent source of tension. Created as part of the Transformation Initiative, the foundation had a dual mission: implementing community programs aligned with our sustainability goals and providing family members with meaningful roles regardless of their position within the corporate structure. Thomas's participation had been particularly surprising. After initially refusing any connection to the new Montgomery vision, my cousin had gradually re-engaged, starting with occasional attendance at foundation meetings before eventually accepting a position on its investment committee. Our relationship remained formal rather than warm, but the open hostility had evolved into something resembling professional respect. "Mr. Montgomery?" I looked up to find a small group of trainees from the manufacturing program waiting nearby, their expressions mixing nervousness with determination. Darius had mentioned they wanted to present their community initiative proposal directly. "Sorry to keep you waiting," I said, extending my hand to the young woman who appeared to be their spokesperson. "You're from the Advanced Manufacturing cohort, correct?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her handshake firm despite her evident anxiety. "I'm Serena Castillo. We've developed a proposal for expanding the training program into local high schools as a pre-apprenticeship pathway." For the next 15 minutes, the group outlined their vision: a structured program that would introduce sustainable manufacturing concepts to students while they were still forming career aspirations, creating a pipeline of local talent for the growing green economy. Their presentation was thorough, addressing implementation challenges, resource requirements, and potential community partnerships with impressive clarity. "We know budgets are tight," Serena concluded, "but we believe this investment would yield returns for both the company and our community for generations." I studied the group, 5 young people from diverse backgrounds, united by their commitment to revitalizing a community that many others had written off. They embodied the principle that had increasingly guided our transformation. The solutions to our greatest challenges often come from those most affected by the problems. "The proposal is compelling," I told them. "I'd like you to present it at next week's Education Initiative review. Carmen will ensure you're added to the agenda. You've clearly done your homework, and this aligns perfectly with our workforce development strategy." Their restrained professionalism gave way to genuine excitement as they realized their idea would receive serious consideration rather than merely polite acknowledgement. As they thanked me and departed, Darius smiled knowingly. "They've been refining that presentation for weeks," he confided, "working nights after 12-hour training days. That kind of dedication is exactly why this campus will succeed where previous revitalization efforts failed." His observation resonated with my experience across Montgomery's operations. The transformation hadn't been driven primarily by executive mandates or consultant recommendations, but by unleashing the creativity and commitment of people at all levels who had previously lacked channels for meaningful contribution. As I concluded the site visit and headed toward my next appointment, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. The Montgomery Transformation Initiative had evolved from ambitious vision to operational reality faster than even I had anticipated, overcoming resistance through demonstrated results rather than theoretical arguments. The initial corporate restructuring, separating Montgomery Holdings into 3 distinct entities focused on sustainable infrastructure, clean energy, and regenerative technologies, had created clear strategic focus while enabling more agile governance. Each entity maintained unified purpose while pursuing sector-specific opportunities, with coordination ensured through integrated leadership and shared sustainability metrics. The financial results had silenced many early critics. After a transitional year of decreased earnings while we implemented structural changes, performance had rebounded strongly across all divisions. The clean energy unit had delivered particularly impressive growth, benefiting from accelerating market demand and our early positioning in emerging technologies. Shareholder returns now exceeded industry averages, with institutional investors increasingly citing our governance model as a competitive advantage. Most gratifying had been the transformation's impact on organizational culture. Employee engagement scores had reached record highs. Recruitment of top talent had become notably easier, with candidates specifically citing our purpose-driven approach as a primary attraction. Even mid-career professionals from traditional industries were seeking transitions into our teams, bringing valuable experience while embracing the opportunity to apply their skills toward meaningful impact. Not everything had gone smoothly, of course. The transition had exposed operational weaknesses previously masked by conventional metrics. Some executives had departed, unwilling to adapt to new expectations for integrated performance beyond financial results. Certain initiatives had failed to achieve expected outcomes, requiring honest assessment and strategic pivots. Yet these challenges had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the transformation, creating opportunities to demonstrate our commitment to learning and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to predetermined plans. The willingness to acknowledge setbacks transparently had built credibility with stakeholders, while reinforcing a culture of continuous improvement. The Family Foundation meeting that afternoon provided a microcosm of this complex evolution. Gathering in the Foundation's headquarters, deliberately located not in the corporate tower, but in a renovated historic building in a revitalizing neighborhood, the Montgomery family members in attendance represented varying degrees of engagement with the transformation vision. Thomas arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed in his customary business attire despite the Foundation's more casual atmosphere. His wife Miranda accompanied him, her initial frostiness toward me having gradually thawed as the Foundation's work gained recognition in their social circles. Victoria participated remotely from Washington, D.C., where her husband's political career had advanced to a Senate seat, with their support for certain Montgomery sustainability initiatives creating beneficial associations for his environmental platform. Elizabeth, perhaps surprisingly, had become the family member most actively engaged with the transformation. After our initial conversation following the will reading, she had reimagined her fashion brand around sustainable materials and ethical manufacturing, ultimately integrating it as a specialized division within Montgomery's Regenerative Technologies Group. Her creative perspective had proven invaluable in translating technical innovations into consumer-friendly applications. Before we begin, I said after preliminaries concluded, I'd like to acknowledge an important milestone. As of last month, the Montgomery Family Foundation has directly supported sustainable development initiatives impacting over 1 million people worldwide. That achievement belongs to everyone in this room, regardless of our differences on specific approaches. The statement wasn't merely diplomatic. It reflected genuine appreciation for contributions from family members who had engaged constructively, despite initial skepticism. Thomas's financial acumen had strengthened the Foundation's investment strategy. Victoria's political connections had facilitated policy discussions that amplified our impact. Even Uncle Frederick, though not present today, had provided valuable historical context that informed certain community partnerships. The impact report is in your materials, I continued, but numbers alone don't capture the human significance of this work. I've invited Marianne Chen to share her first-hand perspective as director of our Community Resilience Program. Marianne's presentation, documenting how Foundation initiatives had helped vulnerable communities prepare for climate impacts while building economic self-sufficiency, generated engaged discussion across traditional family divisions. Thomas raised thoughtful questions about scaling successful pilots. Victoria identified potential policy supports that could amplify outcomes. Elizabeth contributed insights about communicating complex benefits to diverse stakeholders. Watching this interaction, I felt an unexpected sense of fulfillment that transcended the Foundation's direct accomplishments. Family relationships that had seemed irrevocably damaged after the will reading had not been fully healed. Too much history and too many fundamental differences remained for complete reconciliation, but they had been reconstructed around shared purpose despite persistent differences. As the meeting concluded and family members dispersed, Thomas lingered behind, suggesting we walk together to the parking area. We traveled in silence for half a block before he spoke. The Montgomery Innovation Campus is impressive, he said, referencing the construction site I had visited that morning. The integration of education, manufacturing, and research in one location makes strategic sense. Coming from Thomas, who had initially predicted the transformation would destroy the company within 18 months, this qualified as effusive praise. I acknowledged his comment with a nod, waiting to understand his purpose in initiating this rare private conversation. I've been reflecting on grandfather's decision, he continued, stopping at a park bench overlooking the river that divided the city. At the time, it seemed solely punitive, deliberately undermining the succession plan my father and I had worked toward for decades. I was angry, doesn't begin to describe it. Understandably, I replied. Taking the seat, he gestured toward, but 2 years of results tell a different story, he admitted, his expression revealing the difficulty of this acknowledgement. The company is performing well by conventional metrics while achieving things my approach would never have prioritized. Grandfather wasn't being sentimental or arbitrary. He made a calculated choice about the leadership Montgomery Holdings needed for a fundamentally different business environment. The admission clearly cost him considerable pride. Thomas had built his identity around being the natural heir to grandfather's business acumen, the worthy successor who would extend the Montgomery legacy in a direct line. Recognizing the legitimacy of a different path, particularly one led by the cousin he had long dismissed, required significant reassessment of his fundamental assumptions. "I appreciate that perspective," I said carefully. "Your expertise still has tremendous value, even as the company evolves. Your contributions to the Foundation's investment strategy have been genuinely impactful." He nodded, a tight smile acknowledging my diplomatic approach to our complex history. "I'm not seeking a larger role. I've launched a boutique investment firm focused on traditional industries, which suits my skills and preferences. But I would like Miranda and eventually our children to have meaningful connection to the Montgomery legacy beyond just financial inheritance." "The Foundation creates that opportunity," I agreed. "And as we expand the Innovation Campus model to other locations, there will be additional possibilities for engagement that leverage your experience without requiring agreement on every strategic question." Our conversation wasn't warm or particularly personal, but it represented significant evolution from the hostile silence that had characterized the immediate aftermath of Grandfather's will. Thomas hadn't embraced the transformation vision, but he had developed a grudging respect for its viability. The family might never recapture the closeness that had existed in idealized memory, but we had found a path toward constructive coexistence, centered on shared heritage if not identical values. Later that evening, I met with Marcus and Aiko at Verdant Solutions' current facility to review the transition plans for our move to the Innovation Campus. The contrast between this well-equipped research center and our original makeshift lab provided tangible evidence of how far we had come, though we had deliberately maintained the startup culture that had fueled our early innovation. "The bioreactors are performing beyond specifications in extended testing," Aiko reported, displaying the latest production data. "Scale up to full commercial capacity appears feasible on the projected timeline, assuming no unforeseen complications with the new infrastructure, which we're monitoring daily at the construction site," Marcus added. "The integrated design is actually accelerating installation compared to conventional approaches." Their updates reflected not just technical progress, but the successful navigation of what could have been a challenging organizational transition. Integrating Verdant Solutions' innovative technology with Montgomery's resources and reach had enhanced rather than diminished the original vision, creating the potential for impact far beyond what we could have achieved as a standalone startup. "There's something else we should discuss," Marcus said after we concluded the technical review. "We've been approached about potential applications beyond industrial biofuels, specifically using modified versions of our algae strains for carbon capture in urban environments. It's not part of our core business model, but the technology could be adapted with relatively moderate investment." The proposal exemplified the unexpected opportunities that continued emerging from the transformation journey, innovations that crossed traditional sector boundaries to address interconnected challenges in ways that created multiple forms of value simultaneously. That aligns perfectly with the Living Infrastructure Initiative under development at Montgomery Sustainable Technologies, I noted. "Let's convene a joint working group to explore the potential synergies. If the applications prove viable, we could integrate them into several current urban redevelopment projects." As we concluded our meeting and I prepared to leave, Aiko stopped me with an uncharacteristically personal observation. "You know, when you first inherited Montgomery Holdings, I worried you would become like the executives we used to criticize, distant from the hands-on work, focused on management rather than innovation. But you've actually become more engaged, with the technical challenges not less. How have you managed that while handling everything else?" Her question prompted reflection on how my role had evolved. While the scope of responsibility had expanded dramatically, my fundamental approach had remained consistent, focusing on the intersection of technical possibility and human need, whether in a laboratory or a boardroom. "The contexts differ, but the essential work is the same," I explained. "Identifying problems worth solving, bringing together the right combination of perspectives and resources, creating space for innovation while maintaining clear purpose. The scale has changed, but the principles haven't. This continuity of purpose despite transformed circumstances had become a defining characteristic of my leadership approach, and increasingly of Montgomery Holdings as a whole. We had maintained coherent identity through dramatic change by anchoring decisions in consistent values rather than fixed structures or strategies. The following morning brought another milestone for the transformation journey: the public launch of the Montgomery Sustainability Index, a comprehensive framework for measuring corporate environmental and social performance developed in partnership with leading research institutions. The virtual event included executives from major corporations, policymakers, institutional investors, and sustainability experts from around the world. Traditional business metrics capture financial outcomes but ignore critical aspects of corporate performance that determine long-term viability, I explained during my opening remarks. The Montgomery Sustainability Index provides a standardized methodology for assessing impacts across environmental, social, and governance dimensions, enabling more holistic evaluation of corporate contributions. The index had evolved from our internal performance management system, developed initially to guide Montgomery's own transformation. By publishing the methodology and making the assessment tools freely available, we were deliberately catalyzing broader change beyond our direct operations, creating infrastructure for a more sustainable capitalism rather than simply positioning our company advantageously within the current system. This isn't about competitive differentiation, I emphasized to the assembled virtual audience. It's about accelerating necessary evolution across the entire economy. The challenges we face, climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, can't be addressed by individual companies alone, regardless of our commitment or capabilities. We need systemic transformation, which requires shared frameworks for measuring what truly matters. The response exceeded our expectations, with companies representing over $3 trillion in market capitalization committing to implement the index within their reporting systems. More significant than these immediate adoptions was the broader signal. It sent that sustainable business practices were moving rapidly from peripheral concern to core strategic priority across multiple industries. After concluding the launch event, I took a rare moment of reflection in the quiet of my office. On my desk sat a photograph I treasured. Not a formal portrait, but a candid image captured during a family fishing trip when I was perhaps 10 years old. In it, Grandfather and I sat side by side on the dock at the estate's lake, comparing our modest catches with identical expressions of satisfaction. I had placed the photo there as a reminder of the values that had shaped both his life and mine. Beneath the visible trappings of business success, patience, appreciation for natural systems, the recognition that certain things couldn't be rushed or controlled, only respected and worked with harmoniously. The Montgomery transformation journey had embodied these principles at larger scale, not imposing change through force of will, but creating conditions for natural evolution, not sacrificing long-term resilience for short-term gain, not extracting value, but generating it through reciprocal relationship with communities and ecosystems. My phone chimed with an incoming message from Mr. Chen. Harrison would be proud, not just of what you've built, but of how you've built it. The simple affirmation brought unexpected emotion. Throughout the transformation process, I had avoided framing decisions in terms of what Grandfather would have wanted, focusing instead on the future rather than the past. Yet his influence remained present in countless ways, not as constraint, but as foundation upon which new possibilities could be constructed. The inheritance that had once seemed primarily financial had revealed its true nature, not just assets, to be managed, but purpose to be fulfilled, not just resources but responsibility, not just authority but opportunity to catalyze change far beyond what any individual could accomplish alone. As I prepared for my next meeting, a discussion with international partners about expanding the innovation campus model to post-industrial regions globally, I reflected on the wisdom embedded in grandfather's final message. True wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who remains beside you when you have nothing. The journey of the past 2 years had proven the profound truth of those words. The transformation had succeeded not through individual brilliance, but through collective commitment from people who shared fundamental values, despite diverse perspectives and backgrounds. The most valuable inheritance hadn't been monetary wealth, but the opportunity to create meaning that transcended personal comfort or status, to participate in building something that mattered. That evening, standing at the observation point overlooking the Montgomery Innovation Campus construction site, I watched as the setting sun illuminated the partially completed structures in gold light. Workers were finishing their shifts, some heading toward training sessions in the temporary education center, others toward homes in surrounding neighborhoods that had begun showing signs of revitalization. A security guard approached, presumably to inform me that the observation area would soon close for the evening. As he drew nearer, I recognized him as Michael Reyes, whose story I had encountered during a community meeting months earlier. A former factory worker who had lost his job when the original industrial complex closed, now employed in our security training program while completing courses in sustainable building systems. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery," he said with a respectful nod. "Impressive progress, isn't it? My father worked in the old factory for 30 years. Never thought I'd see this place come back to life." "Your father would be proud of your role in that rebirth," I replied. He smiled, gesturing toward the campus. "That's the thing about legacies, isn't it? Sometimes they skip generations or take forms we don't expect. The old industries are gone, but something better is taking their place, if we have the wisdom to build it right." His insight, offered casually but containing profound understanding of continuity amid transformation, crystallized what I had been learning throughout this journey. Legacy wasn't about preserving specific forms or traditions, but about sustaining core values through necessary evolution. Inheritance wasn't primarily about receiving resources from the past, but about accepting responsibility for creating possibility in the future. As I thanked him and turned to leave, the final rays of sunlight caught the solar arrays that would power the campus, transforming them momentarily into dazzling mirrors reflecting the sky. The image seemed a fitting metaphor for the Montgomery transformation itself, taking energy that would otherwise be lost and redirecting it toward productive purpose, creating from inherited resources something that might serve needs beyond our immediate horizon. The true inheritance, I realized, had never been the fortune that had generated such drama at the will reading. It had been the opportunity to participate in building something worthy of the future, an opportunity available not just to those of us blessed with financial resources, but to anyone willing to align their unique gifts with purposes larger than themselves. That understanding, that wealth creation in its truest form was about generating value that outlasted individual lives, was perhaps grandfather's most valuable bequest, not just to me, but to everyone touched by the transformation journey. And, unlike financial assets, it was a legacy that grew rather than diminished when shared, creating ripples of possibility that extended far beyond any single family or company to touch lives we would never even know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.